Welcome to the Roman Mythology as an Empire presentation. This is put together by I am Leminiscent and is being presented by the Archangel Elenia. So, taking a look at the Roman rebranding, this is where we've had a lot of shifts when it comes to what is and what isn't related to astrology. Now, astrology itself is not copulated with mythology at all. However, we use mythology to help us better understand some of the characteristics and qualities that spirits or entities may actually have and how those names were used, given to certain personalities or spirits in order to color a certain characteristic or quality that we find in charts or in personalities with different people, period. So, starting out, we had Zeus, which is linked to Jupiter. This is about kingship, being the law, and the defining mark of patriarchy. Hera, who is Jupiter's wife, Juno, in astrology represents marriage, duty, obedience, and she was also stripped of her sovereignty, which is why sometimes, if you read up on her as well, she goes back and forth between being that submissive wife, family, woman, mother, and shifting back to her Lilith energy when she feels taken advantage of and unappreciated. Then she jumps into that Venus energy when she's doing everything she can to keep the relationships flowing and loving. Aphrodite is Venus. This is about one on one partnerships, beauty, especially for the male pleasure, not really cosmic creation. Aries is representative for Mars, which is the god of war, who then becomes holy and patriotic. Hermes, or Mercury, represents the commerce, contracts, and bureaucracy. And Rome turned spirituality into a state of power, and that was the rebranding. The patriarchal blueprint, as Rome's mythology became the blueprint for patriarchal marriage laws, male only priesthood, which used to be female only, militaristic citizenship, which means war and destruction, was a regular. As we can see, the next piece talks about the destruction of the goddess temples. Because the suppression of matriarchal cultures across Europe was a thing, it was to suppress the power and the magnificence of woman to increase the validation and ego of the man. And in patriarchal societies, the matriarchy doesn't exist. It's kind of labeled as something that was not leading people correctly, or patriarchy was supposed to be like a better rendition of what matriarchy was supposed to represent. Now, looking at Italy's lost matriarchy. Before Rome, Italy was home to powerful goddess cultures. Etruscans honored Uni, which was a great mother goddess, great mother energy. Villanovian people worshipped earth, fertility, and ancestors, which a lot of people will call them pagans, which is kind of like a slur. The priestesses guided temples and civic life because they were so deeply in tuned with, spirit. They were able to guide those who also was seeking spiritual balance, spiritual peace. And women held property and were leaders because they knew the secrets that men would have to go through multiple ego deaths, maybe multiple, but they would have to go through ego death in order to attain the same level of spiritual understanding that that women naturally have. So the Vestal virgins were priestesses of the goddess Vesta, which we know Vesta in astrology represents kind of like the place where the open flame had, it looks like a book with an open flame as a glyph. But for me, every time I see where Vesta is in some chart, I know this is where you get light up. This is where spirit lights you up the most, and you feel that enormous, fire in your belly to create and to do something, because you're so in tune with spirit. Is that spirit is guiding you in the process. So originally, the Vestal versions, they held enormous power. They were the last carriers of Rome's feminine spiritual memory, and their fire represented the life force energy of the state. But Rome stripped them of their sexual rights, independence, and freedom. And of course, this was all so that patriarchy itself would be able to reign freely. So they took from Greece, Egypt, Sumer, Persia, indigenous Europe, Celtic and Druid tribes, as well as African tribes of the North and East Africa. Now, all of these places were originally held by melanin peoples. And, you know, other forms of quote unquote races were birthed after. And these places were very acute in experiencing the matriarchal system, and they wrote the remedies, they wrote the rituals, they wrote the principles that we're all using now and returning to as a collective, that were about healing, connection to spirit, which ultimately was just connection to self, understanding the self more. And Rome assimilated themselves from all of these different cultures who all were matrifocal. But they took all that and turned it into patriarchal. So, Roman astrology system, Jupiter ruled Sagittarius and Pisces, which represented the philosophy, the empire, and belief system. Mars ruled over Aries and Scorpio, which represented war, power, and domination, obsession. Venus ruled Taurus and Libra, which is about beauty, which is also a gateway for social control, creating insecurity in people to force them to bend to the rules. Mostly used for women who are being forced to bend to the rules of patriarchy. Mercury ruling Gemini and Virgo. This is the systems of trade, the logistics, the details of things being written down and documented, which created the system of commerce that Rome was known for. Saturn or Chronos represented law, restriction, karma, empire building. Even though Jupiter ruled over law and philosophy as well and belief system in the empire, Saturn was the restrictions or the boundaries that were created in order to keep the empire safe. Now, the Roman Empire literally mapped onto, with their zodiacal understanding, it became part of the days of the week, military traditions, religious festivals, things of that nature. So, Roman archetypes in the natal chart, Jupiter shows up as your relationship to power, spirituality, and the legal systems. Mars shows up as your war instinct, the boundaries, anger, survival mode that you can get into. Venus shows up as your social self, your relationships one on one, how you are with those, and what is your beauty archetype. Where Saturn is where you face empire rules, limits, and patriarchal pressure. And Mercury is how the mind operates within each of these systems. Notice how the sun and the moon are not present. The erasure of the feminine. For one, it was by reassigning goddess powers to male gods. So wisdom, as we know, come from women, or even Mar, the ocean, went from Minerva or Athena to male philosophers. Justice, like the Lady of Justice, went from Themis to Roman courts. Magic went from Hecate to state rituals. So, by militarizing male gods, Mars becomes the ideal man, war becomes sacred, conquest becomes divine will. Going and taking other people's stuff, calling it yours, and mutilating anyone who gets in the way. By criminalizing goddess worship, Isis temples were destroyed, Diana and Artemis cult were banned, and priestesses were silenced, as they had no space or no room to really worship and heal the way that they always were traditionally doing, because this all was curated by a matrifocal lifestyle. So here we have the rise in Christianity, where the conversion has to take place. So Jupiter or Zeus became God, the Father. Juno becomes Mary, but she doesn't have any power of divinity. She's just a mother. Apollo becomes Archangel Michael, which is, I sincerely do see there's two different versions of Archangel Michael. There's the red and there's the blue. And this, with Apollo becoming Archangel Michael, which Apollo was, linked to the sun, and Archangel Michael is linked to the sun and Sunday, definitely gives the red vibes. And when I say red vibes, it is the red Archangel Michael symbolism, which was the one who conquered the serpent. And the original picture where Archangel Michael has a sword and standing on a serpent, it is a black woman who is a mermaid, not a dragon that we're so used to seeing nowadays. Dionysus, which is the god of, intoxication related to Pisces, becomes Jesus in symbolic resurrection stories. Okay? The symbol of the fish, light fish, dark fish. And Saturn becomes Satan, the demonized father of time, something that you're always bargaining with, but you can never fully repay unless you have to do a dirty deed, right? Rome's modern legacy gave the modern world patriarchal marriage, Western laws, the 12-month calendar. Forget 13 months. Catholic Church structures, which, of course, blended in with military tradition, as well as the courts and contracts that were created. And this kind of gave the separation of what is called civilized and what is called uncivilized. And therein lies the gender roles, which suppressed the feminine spirituality that exists in all of us. So, this is a reflection prompt for all those who are watching. At this point in the story or in the teaching, where in your life do you feel you inherited Rome's expectation of perfectionism, discipline, control, or even silence? Where is your inner goddess asking to break free from the system that were never built for you? I'd like to thank you so much for this presentation brought to you by I Am Leminiscent. Our next lesson will take us into the Druidic and Celtic world, where the Roman Empire tried and failed to completely erase the goddess and the sacred feminine. Should you be interested, you can learn in an hour the meaning of planets, stars, houses, and more. Just go ahead and send an email if you're interested in learning at iamleminiscent@gmail.com. That's iamleminiscent@gmail.com. Again, thank you for watching.